a serialized podcast novel by Matthew William. Chapter 1. Kizzy was nervous. It was her 18th birthday, and she didn't know what to expect. People only ever celebrated the 18th anymore. She didn't know why. What was so special about 18 anyway? She sat in silence as her mother drove them towards the ocean. It was sunny and windy that day, and soon Kizzy could smell the salty air. They parked in an abandoned parking lot, and her mother led the way to the beach through the dunes. Kizzy followed, and she stepped on what looked like solid ground, but her foot sunk into the sand down to her knee. "Mom!" she called. Her mother came back to help, grabbing her by the arm and pulling her out. Kizzy shook the sand from her leg. Fortunately, it wasn't broken. She stared down into that strange hole. Inside the little cavern sat 7 white, leathery eggs. "What are they?" she asked. "Sea turtle eggs," her mother said, squinting into the hole. "Can I take one home?" "Of course not." "Why not?" Kizzy asked. "Because they can't live without the ocean." Kizzy sighed. A sea turtle would have been a pretty awesome pet. She looked at the long distance between the nest and the ocean and tried to imagine the baby turtles making that long quest. "You know," her mother said, "the Indians that used to live around here would tell their children that the baby sea turtles were poisonous so that they wouldn't touch them." "Why's that?" Kizzy asked. "Well, they needed the turtles to make it to the ocean and grow up so the tribe could hunt them later. And if the kids took them, then they'd have nothing to hunt later." Her mother nodded. "So they lied to their kids." "Well, to protect them, yes." "Would you lie to me if we lived back then?" "Probably not," her mother said. When they reached the ocean, they ate their lunch. Her mother had packed shrimp sandwiches and chocolate milk. While they ate, her mother reminded her it was her birthday. "You're 18 now," she said. "Hey, you're right," Kizzy said, suddenly becoming nervous. What was her mother going to do? "I got you a present," she said, reaching into the picnic basket and taking out a flat, black box. "You did?" "Yeah, that's what people used to do for birthdays." "Why?" "I don't know. It was like a reward for surviving another year." "What is it?" Kizzy asked, finally taking the box, shaking it, trying to hear what rattled inside. "You've got to open it." Kizzy carefully unwrapped the paper. It was too pretty to tear. It had little white birds on it. She held her breath as she opened the box. Inside was a knife. The handle was made of deer antler, and the steel blade was shiny and sharp. It was beautiful. "I figured you've been doing so much work on the farm lately," her mother said, "and I know it's been hard for you to be in and out of school for the harvest." "Thank you," Kizzy said. "Just promise me you won't hurt anybody with it." Kizzy rolled her eyes. "I mean it, Kizzy." "I won't," Kizzy yelled, putting the knife in her pocket. After lunch, they went for a long walk through the dunes and came upon a boarded-up old summer house. "I wonder who used to live there," Kizzy asked. "We did," her mother said. "Forever ago." Kizzy looked at her. The wind blew her hair all over the place. Her cheeks were red and her eyes were looking off far, far away. "Me and your father used to come here on vacation." Kizzy listened closely. Her mother hardly ever spoke about her father, so when she did, Kizzy held on to every single word. "I think that's when I was the happiest," her mother said. "Why's that?" "It was perfect. We'd swim at night and look up at the stars and eat and drink wine." "Is it nice to be back?" Kizzy asked. "I thought it would be." At the end of the day, they went to say goodbye to the turtle eggs, but some of the mutant crows had gotten to them. Kizzy chased the disgusting birds away, but shells and slime were all that was left in the nest. When they got back home, some of the crows were out in the field of Enoch beans. "Can you handle this?" her mother asked. Kizzy nodded. It was her job to kill them. Their genetic mutation made them grow to the size of large dogs, 3 feet tall with a 6-foot wingspan, and they were disgusting. They had been designed to help pollinate the Enoch beans, but people had lost control of them after the plague. People had lost control of everything after the plague, and now the crows were a nuisance. The EMP sat out in the dusty old barn between the tractor and the lawnmower. It had 2 wheels and a small ethanol-powered engine. It was their only weapon against the crows, but it was the only one they needed. Reliable, effective, and deadly. The cannon was a flat glass tube, and the shield was a transparent blue plastic polymer. You made sure you stood completely behind that shield when you fired it. Otherwise, those electrical blasts would kill you. The sight of the machine always gave Kizzy a smile. It made her feel like a badass. She yanked on the rope to start the engine. The machine shuddered to life and coughed out smelly gray smoke. Kizzy wheeled it out of the barn and took aim at the small gang of crows that sat in the field, pecking away at the Enoch beans. She punched the button to arm the EMP, stood squarely behind the shield, and pulled the trigger. A blue ring of energy shot from the cannon. Kizzy held onto the handles, absorbing the recoil. When the energy hit the crows, they fell to the ground, dead. The electric shock had stopped their hearts from beating. Kizzy sighed. That part always made her a little bit depressed. The crows were the only animal besides humans that could eat the Enoch beans and still live, and that's exactly why they needed to be killed. If left unchecked, they would live forever and eat every last bean from the face of the planet, and that would be it for humankind. So they had to die so that we could live. When Kizzy was 10, she had a cat named Cheetah. He was orange with white stripes and technically looked more like a tiger, but animal classification was never Kizzy's strong suit. Cheetah was probably the best cat ever. He was so free and friendly. Sometimes he'd purr without being pet. He'd sit next to Kizzy's feet while she did her homework and just purr away like a little diesel engine. And then, one day, her mother explained that cats didn't live forever the way people do. She could fix that, Kizzy thought. She gave Cheetah an Enoch pill in his food. The next morning they found him dead in the barn. It was the saddest day of Kizzy's life. So deep down she found it disturbing that the crows could eat all they wanted and keep on living. And it was unfair that they had to die because of it. But that's the way life goes. Shoot or be shot. Kizzy walked the EMP back to the barn and grabbed some white burlap sacks. The crows had to be removed or they'd poison the crop. Just then, the delivery truck from the city came barreling down the road. Kizzy had to be there to open the crate first. Her mother couldn't know what was coming. When the supply crate emerged from the back of the automated truck, it rolled down the long metal ramp and onto the porch. It looked like every other supply crate that came from the city. 2 feet high, 2 feet wide, 6 feet long, and made of wood. But maybe this was the one. Maybe today would be the day. She dragged the crate into the living room and used her key card to open it. It beeped happily. The top sprung open. Inside, stuffed amidst packaging straw, were cans of food, Enoch pills, ethanol, tools, all of the products that the mutants of the city had made from materials sent in by the humans in the country. All except for that one square white envelope. It stuck out like a sore thumb, and Kizzy's heart skipped a beat. That's what she'd been waiting for. She snatched it from the box and ran to her room. With the door tightly closed, she laid the envelope on her bed. Her hands were shaking. Her chest felt hollow. Was she really alone? She went back to the door and looked up and down the hallway. "Hello?" she called out. Nobody answered. Her mother must have been out in the field still. Kizzy gently closed the door and snuck up to the package as if it were a sleeping bird that could become frightened and fly away. But it didn't budge. It just sat there, waiting. She tore it open, ripping through the white paper, exposing the glossy yellow plastic underneath. Kizzy's heartbeats began to pound in her chest. The flat yellow album was finally in her hands. She went to the closet and pushed all her clothes to the right. She eyed the bedroom door one last time. The coast was clear. She got down on her knees and lifted the floorboards. Down in the cavity sat her prized red record player, just as she had left it. She pulled the yellow album from its cover and carefully laid it on the turntable. It began to spin. Kizzy put the needle to the thread, and it made that amazing crackling noise. She slipped the headphones over her ears and let the music take her away. Kizzy was obsessed with all the music from the city, even though it was strictly forbidden. They said the deaf girl in her class wasn't born deaf, but they had found her listening to music from the city and had taken her hearing away. Kizzy hoped that wasn't true. The music was too amazing to give up. It was a fluke she had ever even heard it at all. She had been out in the tractor, far away from the house, tilling the fields one day. The tractor must have gone through a patch that the radio jammers didn't have blocked. Broadcasts from the city came flooding into the stereo system. It scared the heck out of her. The music was so raw and crazy, like wild animals. But then she caught the rhythms. Then she could sense the intelligence in the construction. It was meant to be fierce and free. That was the only way to say those things that couldn't be said with just words. Those things that hid in the dark basement of your soul and could only be felt, not thought. That first song she heard was called Free Yourself by the mutant artist Banshee. He began to sing about not accepting what people told you, but thinking for yourself. It went against everything they taught her in school. It made her ears tingle. Ever since that day, Banshee had been far and away her favorite artist. And now she had his newest album, 12 new songs to discover. Sitting on her knees, she pulled the hanging clothes around her like a blanket. She swayed to the music and forgot all her worries. The fact that she had no friends, because she always had to be home to work on the farm. Those disgusting crows, the flocks of them that came in constant waves, eating more and more of their crop. She and her mother would lose their farm if they didn't make the monthly quota of Enoch beans. And the closer they got to losing their farm, the more her mother drank. And the more she drank, the meaner she got. Her mother was insanely mad the day Kizzy had punched her teacher. She decided to work Kizzy like a dog during the harvest, hoping that would teach her some sort of lesson. Kizzy regretted nothing. Her teacher was fat and stupid and deserved it. She thought back to that moment. Her teacher, Camilla, had cornered her for forgetting a homework assignment. But she hadn't really forgotten it, she just didn't have the time to do it. Camilla didn't care though. She got right into her face. Kizzy did the only thing a cornered animal could do. She attacked. After that, she had blanked out. The next thing she knew, she was in the headmaster's office while Camilla and her mother took turns yelling at her. Now she realized how foolish she had been. A punch to the nose could send a bone up into a person's brain, killing them instantly. That would have been a death sentence for Kizzy. No trial, no excuses. If someone died because of you, you had to pay the price with your own life. Forever paid for with forever. She hadn't thought of that. She hadn't thought of anything. If she had just slapped Camilla across her fat face, that would have been a lot safer. Kizzy shook all those thoughts away. The music lifted them and made them disappear. That's what it did best. It transported you to another place in time, and suddenly everything was small and inconsequential. Forever stretched out in front of her. From the corner of her eye, she saw her bedroom door opening. In an instant, she tore off the headphones and stood up amidst all her clothes. "Didn't you hear me calling you?" her mother asked. She looked annoyed. "No, sorry," Kizzy said, stepping out from the closet. "I was just rearranging my clothes." She tried to catch her breath. The sweat gathered on her forehead. "And you didn't hear me?" her mother asked. Her eyes squinted. Was she amused or suspicious? I must have been lost in thought. "Are you lying to me, Kizzy?" Kizzy tried to think of something to say. What excuse could she make? In that quiet moment, she heard something that turned her guts rotten. The music was ever so quietly still playing from the headphones on the floor. How could she have been so stupid? Could her mother hear it too? "Yes, I was lying." "You were?" Kizzy nodded. "I was trying to organize my closet before you came back. I wanted to surprise you." "Well, let me see it then," her mother said. She stepped closer. "No!" shouted Kizzy. She put her arms up to block the way. "It's not perfect yet." Her mother smiled. She was always saying, "Now that we have forever, there's no reason to settle for less than perfect." All right, her mother began to leave. At the doorway, she turned around. "Hey, why did you open the supply crate?" "Oh, well, I just wanted to see what was inside." "Well, next time, how about you help me unload it, too?" Kizzy nodded. The music almost seemed louder now. The drums were really kicking in. Normally she would have loved that. Now she hated it. The music wasn't taking her away to another place. No, it was keeping her frozen there in that moment. Time refused to move. "There's something else I need to talk to you about," her mother said. "The report says there's a flock of crows coming. It's a pretty big one. I have to fix the irrigation system before we lose the beans in the south field, so do you think you could handle this one by yourself?" "Of course," Kizzy said. Her nerves vibrated through her voice. Her mother nodded and left. Kizzy let out a big, anxious breath. Her chest was a hive of bees. Her hands were shaking. She turned off the record player and closed the floorboards tightly. She spread her clothes out so they hung evenly across the closet. She had to wait until nighttime before she listened again. Her mother would be asleep then and would be safer. Kizzy went out to the front porch and looked to the southwest. 5 crows were already in the Enoch beans down near the woods, eating away at her life. She jogged to the barn. When she looked back down at the field, the sky above the trees began to fill up with flapping black wings. The cloud grew and grew. This swarm was big enough to take out their entire farm. They swept down and landed on the field in a wave of black feathers. They cawed and cackled as they ripped the Enoch beans from their roots. 10 of them fluttered above the field, looking for a good place to land. But then they spotted Kizzy. They tore through the air towards her. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. They had never attacked before. In an instant, they had her surrounded, pecking at her head with their large, bottle-sized beaks and scratching at her back with their hand-sized claws. Kizzy covered her face. They lunged at her, trying to grab hold of her arms. The gusts from their powerful wings flapped dirt and dust into her eyes. Kizzy saw an opening and sprinted towards the barn, the crows at her back, pulling at her t-shirt. She ran in through the barn door and slammed it shut. The crows pecked viciously at the other side. She felt her forehead. A little trickle of blood came from a cut at her hairline. Those monsters had gone right for her eyes. It seemed blasting them with the EMP suddenly became less barbaric. She started the engine and pushed it towards the door. The gang of crows were still scratching away at the other side. She armed the cannon, kicked the door open, and hid behind the shield. She pulled the trigger, and the blue pulse shot from the cannon and flew through the door. The crows froze midair and fell to the ground. Kizzy pushed the EMP past them. The other crows covered the crops like a black blanket. Their cackles and caws rang in Kizzy's ears. They were laughing as they ate away at her life. She shot blue rings of death out into the field. The cawing gave way to silence as the birds fell to the ground. All those crows, perhaps 100 of them, were now dead. But something was strange this time. She wasn't depressed. No, she actually found herself smiling. The crows had hurt her, and so she hurt them back, and it felt good. This was troublesome. She went back to the barn and grabbed several white burlap sacks. 2 crows filled a sack, and Kizzy hoisted them up over her shoulder. Their beaks, claws, and bones poked her back. That part was the worst. Had it ever felt good to kill the crows before? She couldn't recall. There was always that hollow silence that hung in the air afterwards. It wasn't pleasant. But it was all different this time. They had attacked her. That had never happened before. Something was wrong with them. That explained the whole thing. She hauled the 2 bags to the woods and entered a little path she had carved out for herself. The crows needed to be buried at least 300 feet from the beans. She walked until she could no longer see the field or the house. That was about the 300-foot mark. But then she walked deeper into the woods. A few minutes later, she passed the first abandoned house. A few minutes after that, she passed another and another. And a few minutes later still, she came to the central square of the tiny ghost town. All around her were dirty, decrepit shop fronts and dilapidated homes. In the middle of it all was an old concrete fountain. That's where she had dumped the crows the day before. It was easier than burying them in the hard forest floor. Up on a hill, overlooking the town, was a large electronic billboard. Dr. Enoch, with his square jaw and porcelain white teeth, popped one of his pills into his mouth and smiled. The Enoch pill. Take one every day. #Enoch. Somehow a glitch in the wiring had kept the image repeating itself over and over again into infinity. Kizzy had first seen it from the woods, and that's what had led her to the town. Her mother told her never to come to this place, that it was too dangerous, but she worried too much. Kizzy had been here dozens of times, and there wasn't a thing to worry about. Everyone in the town had died in the plague 18 years before. Kizzy wondered what that must have been like, to lose every person you had ever known in the blink of an eye. One day they were there, the next they were gone. She couldn't imagine losing just one person, let alone all of them. Her brain just couldn't grasp it. And thanks to the Enoch pill, She never needed to. She walked towards the fountain, over the cracked pavement and crooked sidewalk. The wind swayed the weeds that had long ago burst through the concrete. The houses were crumbling, and their windows were dirty with years of grime. This town was completely dead, and nature was reclaiming it vine by vine. It made Kizzy feel empty inside, but that's why she liked it. There was something magical about a place that no longer lived. She was about to dump the crows into the fountain, but something was wrong. The crows from the day before, they were gone. Had some animals eaten them? It would have been a lot to eat. There had been 5 crows. It must have been a pack of animals. But the crows, they were toxic. Maybe some species of wolf or vulture had a special bacteria in its stomach that could handle the toxicity. She emptied the bag. The crows fell to the concrete with hollow thuds. Their loose feathers fluttered all over the place. Kizzy furrowed her brow. If it had been an animal, surely there would be some feathers left, or bones, or at the very least some blood. But there was absolutely nothing. It was all gone. She began to fold up the bag when she felt as if she was being watched. She stopped and looked around. Nothing but the wooden houses and the wind. Some birds flew away from a nearby house. Kizzy saw a person standing there in the window. The figure immediately moved out of sight. The hairs in the back of Kizzy's neck stood erect as coldness spread over her skin. What was that? Was there really someone there? Without thinking, Kizzy began to walk towards the house. Why was she doing this? She didn't want to. Whatever was in that house obviously didn't want to be found. It had successfully hidden away in this town for a very long time, and probably had a very good reason for doing so. But why? Was it something deformed? Kizzy approached the door. It wasn't completely shut, but stood slightly opened. She held her breath and pushed it open. The door creaked on ancient, rusty hinges. A strange smell floated out from the house, like burnt hair and daisies. Kizzy couldn't see very far inside. It was too dark. She stuck her head in over the threshold. "Hello?" she called out. The sound of her voice startled whatever was hiding. It sprang from a dark corner of the room, slammed the door shut, and ran up a flight of stairs. Kizzy leapt from the porch and sprinted for the woods. Her back never felt so exposed. She expected an arm to come down and grab her. The wind blew through the trees, and she heard the sound of strange music coming from the house. She ran the whole way home without stopping. When she made it home, she pushed the door closed behind her and took a moment to catch her breath. What was that thing? What was it? She looked out the window towards the woods and shivered. Whatever it was wanted to be left alone. As she walked into the house, something else took her breath away. Her red record player was sitting on the kitchen table. Thank you for listening to the Enoch Pill podcast. To support this podcast, there's a few things that you can do. You can subscribe and leave a rating on iTunes. You can also like the Enoch Pill on Facebook. And you can visit the blog, theenochpill.wordpress.com, for information on the next episode. Music for this episode comes from bensound.com and incompetech.com. Further information and track listings can be found in the show notes.